Hi, I'm Oliver and this is Deep Cuts, a channel dedicated to music for lovers of music. Happy New Year to all of you. I have to say a huge thank you to anybody who's donated to my Ko-fi page over the last 4 weeks. It's really lovely to get those donations from you, and all of it goes towards all the late night snacks and drinks I'm having when I'm sitting up really late writing these videos for this season, so thank you once again for that. So if you watched my last video, which was the albums of the decade list that I did, you'll know that my favourite album of the decade was Field of Reeds by These New Puritans. Now, I didn't talk about that much on the video because I wanted to save it for this Deep Cuts Essential on that very album. I did also have an extended conversation about this record with Gabriel Abulu, who runs the 3-Track podcast. We had a really an hour-long discussion on this record and why I think it's one of the best. It's quite a cosy chat between two music nerds, so if you want to hear that, links in the description. To my mind, this 9-song, 53-minute record released in 2013 is one of the boldest, most uniquely alluring records I've ever had the pleasure of listening to. It weaves orchestral instrumentation with evocative dissonance, sparing percussion rips through the soundscapes and rattles around your ribcage. The vocal performance is perched just outside of syllabic comprehension. The sonorous tones of the magic resonator piano, which sounds both inviting and strikingly cold. We have a vocal ensemble, pipe organs, French horns, trombones, vibraphones, field recordings, chromatic gongs. There's the sound of a Harris hawk flapping its wings, and they actually brought the Harris hawk into the studio so they could get the sound. Bit mad, that, innit? Often the band that comes up when talking about this record is Talk Talk, and it's for good reason, because there's a similar trajectory happening in the discography of These New Puritans as there was with Talk Talk. Talk Talk released Spirit of Eden and Laughing Stock, and they were albums that were way outside of the comfort zone of the previous 3 records that were much more pop, new wavy oriented. Now, it's a bit different. It's not going to give you an idea of what this record sounds like, because even though they are always brought up, These New Puritans don't sound like Talk Talk, and Field of Reeds does not sound like Laughing Stock or Spirit of Eden. It just sort of frames this change in trajectory. These New Puritans never ever really released music that brushed with the mainstream in the same way that Talk Talk did, with albums like It's My Life and The Colour of Spring. They did somehow get lumped with indie noughties acts that were the flavour of the month in NME, and I never really understood why, and me and everybody else really when you're looking back, because they sound absolutely nothing like bands like The Horrors, who were sort of lauded over, and they were making stuff that was more angular and post-punky, but it definitely didn't sit in the same place. And that became clearer when they took that post-punk angular instrumentation, they paired it with Japanese taiko drumming, classical orchestration, and you're starting to think, okay, this band are really trying to do something that seems to step outside the conventions that they were placed in. And they managed to do all of these things and bring this instrumentation in without it ever really sounding like a gimmick. Generally, I think it can be quite difficult for modern rock bands to bring in classical and orchestral instrumentation. You know, nothing grates on me more than this saccharine string part that's brought in over the top of standard rock instrumentation just to add this sense of drama. It's frustrating, and it's a cheap gimmick to try and bring a sort of weightier tone to your music. This is where the dedication and craft of the musician is proven. So Jack Barnett, who is the arch dictator of These New Puritans, kind of leader of the band, he decided to learn neoclassical orchestration and composition just for this record, despite having no formal training. It's a small hint at the obsession that drives him as an artist to want to reinvent yourself over and over again, to make something so striking that listeners end up sitting back and going, wow, what is this? This is what will happen when you listen to this record for the first time. I pretty much guarantee it. Jack Barnett and his brother George, who plays drums mostly in the band, they're from Southend-on-Sea in Essex, which isn't too far from where I'm from in Kent, and they paired up with Graeme Sutton for this record. Now, Graeme Sutton also helped produce Hidden in 2010, but he really steps up his game in this, and I think a lot of his influences come through more than they did so on Hidden. So if you don't know, Graeme Sutton was part of the incredible post-rock group Bark Psychosis. In fact, he was very much the sort of leader of Bark Psychosis in the same way that Jack Barnett is of These New Puritans. If you've never listened to Hex before, it's one of those albums which has very few comparisons. You can't really compare it to anything because it is just so different and so interesting, so unique, so beautiful. I love that album. Go and listen to Hex. I think the way that a record like Hex utilises space and dynamics can really be heard in this record, and I like to think that Graeme brought some of that to the table when he was sitting there hours on end in the studio with Jack, meticulously putting these parts together and trying to make sure that the record worked and was produced in the best way that it could be. I'm going to get to the instrumentation in a sec, but one of the salient components of this album that's stuffed with moments that make you go wide-eyed is the use of human voices. Jack wanted to put a lot of effort into the vocal performances on this record, not just his own vocal performances, but that of the guests that would join, so choirs, guest vocalists that had completely different sounding voices to him, and it's all about using the unique qualities of the resonant human voice, so different to the instruments that you'd be using throughout the rest of the album. Jack's own voice on the record is mellifluous. It flows in a very deliberate way. He spent a lot of time on the lyrics and started removing consonants from them to make sure that nothing sounded too fricative, so you get that sort of flowing sound from it. And sometimes that actually makes it difficult to understand what he's saying. But if you delve into the lyricism, you'll see that it's of equal weight to the instrumentation, and it matches up with the sort of high drama that this album brings. In between the islands where we used to swim, to that place I am on my way. I am on my way, I swam towards your ship. He has said in interviews it was a conscious decision to spend a lot of time on the lyricism and get it right, even if you can't always hear it. Because I think that there is perhaps it's an incorrect, I think, assumption that some experimental music, it doesn't really matter what the person's saying because it's all about what it sounds like, and actually working hard on lyricism is sort of a conceit of mainstream popular music. But they're proving otherwise with this, and I like the fact that the lyrics resonate with what the rest of the record sounds like. Opening track, This Guy's in Love With You, doesn't even include Jack's own voice. Instead, we have this field recording of an amateur musician singing a cover of a Hal David and Burt Bacharach song. It's a resonant choir opening with a gorgeous horn-led crescendo that I think is designed so if you listen to this record, you go, oh, okay, this is the sort of album I need to sit up and take note, pay attention to. I'm not just going to be able to just let this pass me by. I'm going to really need to listen to it and see where it takes me. The gentle piano welcomes in a brief moment of dissonance, and it sort of hints at what you're going to get in the following tracks. Second track, Fragment 2, kicks things up a notch with a stepwise piano motif, and we eventually get the introduction of Jack's vocals. And then we welcome in the strings. Oh my god, the strings. It's also an example of how the percussion is used sparingly. So when George finally comes in with that off-kilter snare rhythm, it hits so hard because it's not been used up until that point. It builds to this moment. And that's a good microcosm for the rest of the record itself and how Jack orchestrates it. He has all of these tools in his arsenal, which is very well and good, but if you're not going to be able to correctly use them and work out the relationship between different instruments and different timbres and different sounds, there's almost no point. Because he understands that, he creates the perfect harmonies and sometimes dissonances between different instruments and creates space so it feels like a journey. It feels like you're working towards something and it's being built all the time. The intensity of The Light in Your Name is such a brilliant moment. So you have Jack's vocals and Elisa Rodriguez, a guest vocalist, and then mournful tones are almost drowned out by the hopelessness of this horn sound, and then we get this complete cacophony that closes the track, and it's like an overwhelming moment. It's like every single one of your senses is just being battered into submission. Dutch composer Michel van der Aar also worked with Jack on this composition, and it's nice to see him working with someone from a different musical sphere, kind of bringing this neoclassical, haunting, enigmatic explosion of sounds into one complete piece of work. The Island song is 9 minutes, and it's sort of the epicenter of the record. It manages to tug at your heartstrings, slowly fill you with dread, and then end on this tinge of uneasy melancholy. Organ Eternal is a track that I think will draw a tear to your eye if you're in the right frame of mind, because the grace and artistry of this initially simplistic track is perfect. That looping organ motif, which has a Philip Glass-esque tone, splintered with digitized cries that sound like they're reversed, eventually welcoming those orchestral parts once again just to build it, build the atmosphere, feel that emotion powering through the piece. As you listen to it, it's difficult imagining any other track in existence being quite as moving as this one. Admittedly, it's not the most moving track ever, but whilst you're in it, it becomes this singular thing that you're experiencing and you can't really imagine anything else. I mean, I might be the only one that has that reaction to it, but I'd love to know what you guys think. Theatrical low bass helps build this track to its wonderful conclusion, welcoming in these choral voices towards the inevitable end. Apparently Jack's incredibly meticulous nature rubbed some of the orchestral performers up the wrong way, and they're probably not used to working in that fashion, certainly didn't expect these popular musicians making them do takes 70 or 80 times until they got it completely perfect, and that moved through on the live performances that they did as well, and there's a live recordings of all of these tracks on streaming services, and you should check it out because it's lovely to hear what this album sounds like in a live setting and how they slightly tweaked things and changed things. But apparently the rehearsals for those were equally as frustrating as the recordings for some of these players. But it takes a specific kind of obsession to birth a work of this magnitude, to carve out a project that delivers its audience gracefully through track after track of expressive, intelligent music. It's a masterwork, and it's a deep cuts essential. Thank you for watching. Let me know what you think of Field of Reeds by these New Puritans. I obviously love it because I've just gone on about it for the last however many minutes. Please join me on the Deep Cuts Discord tomorrow at 10 o'clock GMT, where we're going to be listening to the whole thing in its entirety and reacting to it. I imagine a lot of people will be listening to it for the first time, so I can't wait to see some of those reactions. Thank you so much for watching as usual. I'll be back next week with a discussion video. See you then.